speaking of bullies, it wouldn't be a sports talk show if we didn't talk about somebody getting fired.
That's right.
And in my opinion, I've been on this train for quite some time now, and I'm not suggesting for a single second that I know all of what happens behind the scenes at the University of Cincinnati. But I do know this. When you are in charge of an organization as a whole, as always, it starts at the top. You're either going to get a lot of credit for what happens, or you're going to get a lot of blame. It happens in the NFL at quarterback, and Lamar Jackson is exhibit A of that example. You can play as well as you like. You can be as talented as you want to be. But if things don't go well for the organization that you are a part of, you are going to be held accountable. Which brings me to the athletic director at the University of Cincinnati. Now, everybody always wants to point fingers at coaches and say, hey, this guy needs to get let go, that guy needs to get let go. And very rarely in college athletics does the athletic director kind of become the main point of emphasis when it comes to what you would call a problem. More times than not, it's because they've hit a home run, if you want to call it that, on one hire, right? Mm-hmm. The problem at the University of Cincinnati is that you don't have the luxury at an institution like that to survive what I would call a relatively significant drought within programs. So, Ohio State football is going to have to be bad for a generation for them not to sell their stadium out. You're going to have to be bad for so long that it would almost seem impossible for that institution not to be able to figure it out. I don't believe Cincinnati's like that. In very much the same way that I view the Reds and the Big Red Machine and the glory days that were basically the dominance of the Cincinnati Reds. You can almost rest in those laurels. You can almost feel like that's the way it's always going to be. And I always wonder to myself, as you look at the University of Cincinnati and you think, how long does that last for the basketball program? How long do you get that leash of saying? And many people would agree with this. Even Xavier fans deep down might say, yeah, listen, as much as I don't like the University of Cincinnati and I don't like their basketball team, I can honestly respect the fact that they have some history there and they have kind of a pedigree to stand on of success. But as the years continue to go by and the tournaments continue to get missed, when does that go away? Because I would argue it feels like, and again, this is an outside perspective, it feels like we're going down that path. It feels like we're 2 or 3 tournaments missed away from the next freshman class entering into the University of Cincinnati. And they're not there to go to basketball games. They're not there to go to football games. They're going there largely because they want to go to a big school at a big city. And maybe you could argue that, it could get flipped right back on its head if you win some games, this, that, and the next. But I don't believe that we are closer to the glory days of, and you could say whatever you want about Bob Huggins, and I'm not trying to defend the man by a single second of saying this, but he had basketball at the University of Cincinnati at its highest peak that it's been in since I've been alive. And now the question remains is who's at fault for all of this? Because John Cunningham is a name that many people probably outside of the diehards of sports have no clue who he is. And that's okay. The question I have to you, and to you as well, Reed, is what is their responsibility? Is it strictly just fundraising? Is it strictly just going out and trying to find ways to get your institution in a better place? And one would argue you're the director of athletics, so you'd like to think that the teams would have to be successful. But maybe some don't believe that. Or is it strictly, hey, their job is to find coaches, hire coaches, and make sure those athletic programs are doing well academically. And I know they would never say this publicly, but more importantly, athletically, they're doing well. And you look at the Learfield Cup standings, and I've referenced this obviously on Twitter a few weeks ago, excuse me. And I know that might be something that people scoff at, right? It's like, oh, the Learfield, who cares about the Cup standings? Well, if you fail at hiring the football coach and you fail at hiring the basketball coach, you could make an argument that those are only 2 of, call it 12, 13, 14, 15 programs that they're in charge of. Now, we all know that those are the most important. Those are the ones that bring in the most money, which typically runs the world. But I guess the question is if all of those other programs aren't doing well either, then where actually is the issue? And perhaps it starts at the very, very top. Because I guess the question I have is we want to talk about how long Wes has left. Oh, Scott Satterfield, if he doesn't do well this year, is he got to go? How long does John Cunningham have left? He's the guy that, quite frankly, created this situation.
When I look at Cincinnati, it's so interesting because you were right when you said it really doesn't matter what you do in the other 14 sports that UC carries. If you knock out either the basketball or the football coach, like if you hit a home run higher with one of those two, who cares what the women's soccer? And I'm sorry to say that.
No, you're right.
I'm sorry to say that, but that's true. Like, who cares what's like if women's soccer is going winless every single year, you're not going to lose your job because you hired the home run football coach. And for a long time, Cincinnati not only continued to hire great coaches, like they didn't miss. Like, look at every football coach that has come through here. Brian Kelly, Butch Jones, and Tommy Tuberville. It didn't work, but that was, that's a swing, right? You're taking a guy that had success in the SEC and you're bringing him here. And then you get Luke Fickell, who was a one-year head coach, failed at Ohio State, but that was a big hire. Right. Then you go get Scott Satterfield, and on the day he was hired, you're just like, ugh.
Yes. Same
with basketball. You go Bob Huggins, you go Mick Cronin, back-to-back great coaches, right? Then you get John Brannon, the NKU coach. Ugh.
Right. It's almost like, you try to relatively outsmart the room. And I guess my thing with UC is, in the specific situation that they find themselves is sometimes in order to get out of tough spots, you got to make tough decisions. And I wonder to myself how long Wes Miller has, because the one thing that Wes Miller does have going for him is he's recruited very well. He has. He's recruited very well. Statistically, or whatever term you'd like to use, based off of 247 rankings, they have the most successful classes that they've ever had in the history of their program. But you backtrack, and then you got to ask yourself the question is that a product of where that program is because of the league that they play in now? Or is that a product of Wes Miller? And I would like to give Wes most of the credit, to be quite frank, because they've played in the Big East. They've been a part of bigger basketball brands. And I get the American wasn't very good, but at the end of the day, it's still UC athletics. And I think that holds still some weight. But the biggest point is that there's a stud coach, a star coach that's waiting to bounce back. I think back to all these people that got canned because something happened at their program. There was some turmoil. There's a guy named Kelvin Sampson. I don't know if you know him. Might be one of the best coaches in college basketball right now that got let go of a bit of a school because he was texting during a dead period. It's almost hilarious to look back at what some of these coaches got fired for because of the NCAA violations they had. You also then jump down into a situation, and you can say whatever you want about what's going down at Auburn, but Bruce Pearl, let's face it, kind of left in pretty bad taste the last time he was in NCAA. Got kind of let go, not kind of let go, got let go, gets brought back. Everybody's like, oh, man, Auburn, they're desperate. I mean, they're desperate. Right. They're going and getting a coach that's got a really bad, pedigree of a stain on his resume. Well, I don't know. They're just number one in the country now. There's another guy out there like that right now. And I don't know who's going to get him, but somebody's going to get him. His name's Will Wade. He went to LSU, got canned, let go because he was paying players. Turns out that you weren't allowed to do that at the time. Now that's part of the deal. And I just wonder, a guy that can take McNeese State. I didn't stutter when I said that. McNeese State. And they're good. They are good. And now you have a situation where you're a team like UC or many other and I don't say mid-majors, but mid-level schools at big Power 5 programs. And you could say, UC's not mid-level. I hate to say this, but that's where they're at right now. They're a middle-of-the-pack best team in the Big 12. In order to get back to the top of the league, you're going to have to go find somebody that has the ability or a proven resume to do it, and Will Wade's that guy. I'm wondering who's going to hire him, and it's hard to give up on Wes now.
Yeah.
But if not now, when?
We are teetering closer to Wes not being the guy, but I'll say this about Wes. Unlike Satterfield and unlike John Brannon, Wes was a splashy hire. There's no doubt. People were excited for Wes Miller. He says the right things. He recruits well, and he had success. Obviously was a pretty good basketball player. He's got Roy Williams coming in the building, which doesn't equal wins, but it makes your program feel a little more relevant. So I think it's unique to not give up on Wes yet, but it's certainly teetering towards like, man, you gotta turn this around. I'm just talking about Cincinnati as a whole. I think last year, first year in the Big 12, they didn't have a single athletic program go above 500 in conference play.
Yes.
That's immediately reflected on your athletic director. And I don't know how you can go 3 if Wes Miller is a miss, which I don't think neither one of us are there yet.
No, not totally.
We're going close.
I would just say this. If Will Wade said he's willing to come to Cincinnati and I'm in his shoes, I'm in Cunningham's shoes, then maybe he can't. This is the weird situation with Cunningham is that Wes is his guy. He brought him in. It's kind of hard to go back to the administration, the powers that be, the president of the university, and say, hey, I think I might have messed up. I want to go get someone else. At some point, you keep going back to the boss and saying you ran out of money or you need something. They're going to eventually think that you're the problem. And Cunningham perhaps doesn't want to do this. But I'm telling you, if Will Wade at McNeese State said he wants to come and he'd be the head coach at University of Cincinnati, I have nothing against Wes. Wes could end up being a great coach. Right. But I know what I get in Will Wade. I've seen it with my own eyes. He took a program at LSU that was historically bad in the SEC.
Never good.
And then eventually, like within a couple years, you're immediately one of the best teams in the SEC. That's not by coincidence. You have a guy that obviously knows how to do it, and he goes to McNeese State, and then immediately they become like good enough to start beating some relative, I don't want to say major Division I teams, but that's what they did. And I'm not suggesting for a single second that I think Wes Miller's a terrible coach.
No.
I just think there's a time and a place, and desperate times calls for desperate measures, and Johnny Cunningham is at that desperate measure stage, in my opinion. Like, if Wes doesn't make the tournament, and Satterfield goes out there next year, and let's just say, and I know this sounds crazy, they don't win 9 games. And I know that sounds like a lot. What if they go 8-6? I don't care. I need to see drastic improvement. If I'm the leadership at UC, Cunningham's gone. Period.
I'll make a case for Cunningham here in a second, but I saw someone put this in the chat, and I think it's pretty interesting. You're saying if Will Wade, you make Will Wade an offer that he can't refuse because you're so convinced that he can turn it around and all that. If Will Wade takes this job, do you think he would leave UC for a bigger job if he's really successful? Like, do you think you would use it as another stepping stone, or because he's kind of damaged goods, he'd be here in the long haul?
No, I think here's what I would always say about the stepping stone thing that is the University of Cincinnati. Sometimes you're at a place that is always going to lend itself to the chance of someone else coming in and leaving.
Right.
If Notre Dame football, which I know we can all agree is kind of a laughable thing to say now that Marcus Freeman had them where he has them. Right. But if Notre Dame football can be perceived as a stepping stone for Brian Kelly, and I get they weren't really that, but it's always perception. It's always dependent upon coaches and what they want to do. Luke Fickell, if he had to do it over again, my guess is I hesitantly say this, he got paid. He went to Wisconsin. He got paid. He's probably going to get fired. Let's all be honest about that. He's going to get fired because he went to a place that's going to be difficult to win at in a league that's tough. And I guess, Luke Fickell, maybe he's seen the cupboard was very bare at University of Cincinnati, which we don't need to go down that path. But,
right.
There's something to be argued that Satterfield came into a horrible situation. But ultimately, if you go out and you hire a guy like Satterfield, you leave yourself no margin for error if they're not good. Mm-hmm. Which gets me into the next topic with the Cincinnati Bengals, if we're being completely honest.
I don't want to go there. I was going to make a case for John Cunningham real quick.
Go ahead. I don't think he has one.
The only thing
I'll
say is
Mr. Nice Guy.
Well, I'm just trying. As the athletic director, he did broker the deal that got them into the Big 12, and that's certainly worth something, right? Like, and I know that all these conferences were expanding, so maybe anybody could have done that. But he was the athletic director overseeing the deal that got them into a major conference. So, and other UC fans will point this out. He also brokered the deal to get the Jordan brand back. I don't know. Like, maybe that's not worth anything. It's certainly not worth anything on the floor. But maybe he's more politician than he is executive or talent acquisition. Maybe he's better at, getting the program, raising funds, raising NIL, or doing all that stuff, which that's part of the job of being athletic director. But it's pretty clear that he's pretty bad at hiring coaches for your marquee programs.
Yeah, and listen, I'm not downplaying NIL at institutions like the University of Cincinnati or anywhere else. There's always a level of relevance that you need to have in NIL just to have players in general. But I just look at the fact that if you're going to be at the University of Cincinnati, especially on the football side of things, you're going to be outmatched at all time. You're going to have to do more with less. You're going to have to moneyball, if you want to call it that, every single year in order to be at the national level. And the one thing that Luke Fickell did for the University of Cincinnati football program is he didn't do them a great service when he basically got them to the pinnacle. And some would say that's great, and it is great. But it also led to expectations now. There's expectations around Cincinnati to where if the football team doesn't win 10 games or they aren't a part of the, Big 12 championship type pedigree of a season, it's not going to be good enough. And I would argue that is going to be a damn high standard to make at the University of Cincinnati. And in order to be able to do that on a year in, year out basis, again, the Big 12's relatively weak at football, yes. But I just think that you're going to have to probably outsmart people when it comes to recruiting, which they're terrible at right now, if we're being honest. I don't know if you've looked at 247, but the University of Cincinnati football program's like last in the Big 12 for recruiting. Now, maybe they find diamonds in the rough. There's always the no-star players that end up becoming 5-star players on the field. But in general, it's not looking promising if you're a Cincinnati football fan. And I just don't think the way that I view it all, the fundraising aspect of it all, the brokering the deal to the Big 12, in my opinion, is more of an institution, school-led thing.
Right.
And it's also based off the history of your programs. Not saying John Cunningham had nothing to do with it, but I would argue that he had much less to do with it than what his real job is, which is to make sure that the teams that go out there that wear the Cincinnati across their chest win games. And the fact of the matter is that when you look at, again, people laugh at it, the Learfield Cup, which, if you don't know what the Learfield Cup is, it's a pretty basic standings, which goes off of how did your teams do in league play relative to the other teams that are in Division I, which is a pretty good metric to go off of, because at least when you play in league play, you're playing relatively the same size schools. Mm-hmm. So you're just going off of what are you doing with what you have. And they finished damn near dead last out of almost 300 teams. The proof's in the pudding. John Cunningham is on thin ice. And the truth also is Wes Miller is the only guy, in my opinion, that has a chance to save him. And it starts with them playing BYU in this next game and having to find a win, stack some wins together, get into the tournament. And guess what? In March, if they win a game in the tournament, no one's talking about any of this. But that's the margins that are in sports. Let's be honest.
Right.
Lou Anarumo, 2 years ago, was praised. Mm-hmm. Fast forward 2 years, he's fired. And now you have Al Golden.
It happens quickly. In the final thing I'll ask you about this UC before we dive in there, what does it say? You talked about expectations and where the expectations are of a football program. What does it say about, and I think most Bearcat fans would say that they hold basketball in higher esteem than their football program. What does it say about the expectations that UC Bearcat fans, I think Elliott said this, a Sweet 16 appearance for UC basketball is on par with, making the college football playoff in a four like that's, if you're a UC fan around my age, you've seen the Bearcats make one Sweet 16. That's where they want to go. Like, it's not like championship, Final Four, win the Big 12. It's simply, can we win 2 games in the tournament? What do you think that says about the state of the program at the current moment?
Like I said, I would argue that institutionally, that's not the same. But from a fan base perspective, it probably is. I mean, if you asked or polled people that claim themselves to be Cincinnati fans, they would probably, if you told them you would give them three Sweet 16s and or farther over a 10-year stretch or one college football playoff appearance, they're gonna take the basketball, and maybe rightfully so. But the amount of money that Cincinnati got from making the college football playoff is significantly more than what would happen for the basketball team. So football is the driver financially at Cincinnati. But from an overall culture perspective around the fan base that exists within Cincinnati, basketball drives that. So you're in a unique situation as the athletic director at the University of Cincinnati, but you can't go for 2. You can't go for 2. You can be what you're worth in a way, right? When you're in the NFL, right? You can get away. If you're a star receiver, you can get away with a couple more penalties or off the field issues. But if you're the last man on the roster and you go out and again, you get in trouble with the law, you're going to probably get cut. And I guess I'm to the point now with John Cunningham is he's done nothing that makes me think he deserves grace. He does done nothing that makes me think, you know what? I know he swung and missed on Scott Satterfield, but he hired Luke Fickell, but he didn't do that. You know, I know he swung and missed on Wes Miller, but he hired John Cunningham, and he was a success. That wasn't the case. Now, John Cunningham, to be fair, was hired under Bond, but it was like a month before Bond left, and Cunningham was the next man. He was like the right-hand man.
Right,
so I'm not suggesting that he hired Brandon, but I'd like to think that he was probably part of the conversations, considering he was a month into the idea of being the athletic director, a month away from being the athletic director. So, you know,